In this manifesto, I am talking about hypothetical countries except for those cases when a specific country is indicated in the sentence. The word spirituality in this manifesto has little, if any, relation to any religions, and it refers rather to knowledge about the superior intelligence and the reasons for the creation of the material world, the universe, as well as to the interaction of individual people with other people and creatures in the universe. You can learn more about spirituality as well as of other interesting and important things in Michel Desmarquet's free ebook Thiaoouba Prophecy, also known as Thiaoouba the Golden Planet. I will start by mentioning the known to me foundations of life, which will become the building blocks of my ideas in this manifesto. The superior intelligence, the spirit, created everything that exists materially. People exist physically for the purpose of spiritual development. The reincarnation of the soul, or the astral body, plays an important role in this development, since people can look at the world from different points of view, which depend on the material and spiritual knowledge accumulated by a person. There is knowledge and there is faith. In simple words, faith is something that exists in our imagination, but not beyond it. Knowledge is something that exists in our imagination and beyond. Everything material is a simple vibration that creates in everything two extreme values with a balance in the middle. Everything that exists is under the influence of these vibrations and, accordingly, also has duality, or balance, and periodicity in its features. That is, being in the middle with a reasonable approach gives the most fair and harmonious life. There are wrong and correct actions, decisions. A person pays with suffering for each of his mistakes, instantly or after some time, which can be counted in lives. Wrong decisions include doing nothing and reworking something, excess work. Balance also needed here. Correct decisions lead to a positive result, to happiness. Because of this universal law, it is beneficial for all people to come to a spiritually oriented organization of society, regardless of their position in society. To maintain their existence, beings, in our case people, need to have access to resources such as food, water, air, light, knowledge, minerals, etc. To create tools, you need to have three ingredients: knowledge of how to make the tool, the resources from which the tool is created, and technologies or tools for creating a new instrument. Our physical body, hands, legs, etc., is also a tool, with the help of which we can create the simplest tools, and then use them to create more advanced things. Duality is also reflected in science. Blind faith is something on one side of the scale, and blind rejection of any little known material phenomena is on the other. Many scientists make mistake here. The golden mean is when people study all the theories put forward and also do not reject the possibility of the existence of certain things. People understand that they do not know everything, and they understand that there is a possibility that in the past people may have made a mistake in scientific conclusions about some universal laws. Each person seeks to benefit for himself and makes decisions based on his material and spiritual knowledge that he has regarding the life situation in which he is. Having almost finished writing my book, Simple Truths of Life, I realized a very interesting, important and simple truth about what kind of social structures can ever appear on the planet. We need to remember the sinusoid and gradient where the bottom and top zones are errors, and only the part that is in the middle is the right choice, since it is completely balanced, containing the correct elements of the bottom part and the correct elements of the upper part. Further, we remember that for a healthy, harmonious life, people need to have access to knowledge and resources, products, such as food, water, minerals, light, air, etc. We absorb some resources into ourselves and they keep our human body alive. while other resources can be used by people to create tools to make human life on the planet easier. Here you need to remember Sauer's words that technology should assist spiritual development, not confine people within a materialistic world. It is worth noting for the better understanding of my thoughts that at the present moment our modern society does not need to create some resources on their own, such as air and light. But in general situations may arise when people need to create those resources that are so commonplace for us. An example would be a space station or a city on a dead planet, if we allow ourselves to use the imagination a little, where people need to artificially create both air and lighting. I realized a long time ago that there is a relationship between people and resources products. A person either makes the decision on how to get or produce a product, or someone else makes this decision for him. Then there can either be a barrier, money for example, between a person and a product, or the barrier may not exist. Once I wondered, what if there is also a third dimension, so to speak, between man and resources? This would be logical given what I know about the universe and life. And so, while working on the manifesto and writing in a separate file the methods for people to get products, I wrote down that people can either produce products by their physical labor or products can be produced by robotics, machines. This was what I thought could exist, the third direction in relations of the human being with the products he consumes. Thus, there are three types of relationships between individual people and resources products, each of which has two extreme values, which is erroneous, as well as one average and balanced value, which is correct. I list them all in the table below, where the first red row shows how people make decisions on how to extract resources and or produce products. The second green row shows how people produce products and or extract resources. The third blue row shows how people get different products and or resources. The extreme ways of self-organization of society are depicted in color. They are erroneous and will lead to problems, and people will suffer for their choice to live under such a social structure. In the middle column, without a colored background, there are the most correct and reasonable ways of self-organization of society, in which people will not experience the suffering of the two most extreme ways of organizing society. By products, I also mean resources. The incorrect way of making decisions on how to produce products or get resources. Each person decides by himself how to produce the products he personally receives. The word chaos comes to mind. Then some primitive society comes to mind where each person lives by himself. Another incorrect way of making decisions how to make products. Not a single person decides how to make a product. The total slavery of society can be an example here. When one country completely controls absolutely all of people of the other country. Or, if we will go into what is still a fiction, when people, by mistake or malice, programmed robot or machines in such a way that all people become enslaved by them. Incorrect way of how to produce products. Products are produced only by people, by their physical labor. That is, people make products with their own hands, hunters and gatherers, for example. Another incorrect way of producing products. Products are not created by humans. The products are produced by machines or robots, for example. People themselves do not work at all, since everything is completely automated. An incorrect way of receiving the produced products. There is no barrier between a person and a manufactured product, and any person, without exception, can receive it. Example: You enter a store, take the product you need, and leave the store with it. No money or other restrictions between you and the product on the shelf of the store. Another incorrect way of receiving the produced products. There is a barrier between a person and manufactured products, which can be a pass, money, and so on. If you come to the store, take the product you need there, and go out with it into the street without giving money to the cashier, then you will be considered a thief with all the ensuing consequences. The correct way of receiving products. The manufactured products necessary for a healthy life are available to all people without exception. There is no barrier between a person and such products. And all other manufactured goods are available only to working people. There is a barrier between a person and a product, without which one can live a healthy life. If we create a graph from the above three ways people interact with products' resources, then the three rays representing each of those ways will create a cube in which they intersect each other at the center of that cube. In the universe, only these three relationships exist between people and products' resources, and others are simply physically impossible, as far as I know. Accordingly, this cube contains all possible ways of organizing society in our world. With this 3D graph, you can understand where any country is in terms of its development. The closer to the center, the fairer and easier life is in that country, provided that the country takes logical methods of organizing society from all six extremes. In the extremes, represented in this graph by the edges of the cube, people suffer the most, because this way of organizing society is unjust and unstable. Before I go into more detail about the average balance and what I believe to be the correct way of organizing of society, I would like to take a moment to explain why I think that the most extreme ways of organizing of society are wrong and will lead to suffering. First, red row. The extreme where each individual decides by himself how to produce products brings up two pictures. One picture is some primitive society that does not have technology, where each person tries to get food for himself as best as he can. There is no mutual help between people, and the knowledge acquired by one person will disappear after his death instead of being preserved and serving as a lesson for other generations. As a result, many people in this very extreme way of organizing of society will suffer, making mistakes because of their ignorance. Another picture is the same fragmented society as in the previous example, but here people have technology. Because each individual person does what he wants in the absence of a general order and general rules of behavior, conflicts between people are inevitable in such chaos. As for the other extreme, I hope you yourself perfectly understand why the total slavery of society is a mistake. By the way, if we move by 1 or 2 steps on the scale towards the golden mean, then we will receive serfdom and slave-owning society that we had in our history. Second, green row. When all products are made exclusively by people, people have to work very hard. There can be diseases, psychological depression, and high mortality. On the bright side, it can be noted that people are in nature, which is the focus of their attention. People cultivate their spirituality, observing how the world around them works. As for the extreme, when all products are made exclusively by machines, robots, I remember a saying about free cheese that exists only in a mousetrap. Since machines will do everything for a person, a certain number of people may lose the desire to learn and develop themselves, which will lead to a lot of mistakes and suffering. Other people will also feel the consequences of the wrong decisions of people with little education. Then there is a negative thing in the fact that many people might focus their attention on the material world and they will not have time to develop their spirituality. As a result, people will have to stay for a life or two on the planet of the first category. Third, blue row. when absolutely all manufactured products are accessible to absolutely all people in society, including those who do not want to work, then those people who work may begin to experience negative emotions and thoughts from the fact that not working people can receive exactly as much as they do. This will lead to conflicts. Perhaps many people will have no incentive to work at all, which will negatively affect their psyche and place even more burden on those who work. It is worth clarifying that by work here I mean such activity, the result of which will give society vital resources and products. That is, acting, streaming on the internet, manually decorating dishes, etc. is, in a balanced society without money, for example, a hobby, but not a job. At the opposite extreme, there is a barrier between human and product, which may well be money. Many people strive to accumulate as much money as possible, since there is a limited amount of money. An increase in money for one person means a decrease in money for another person. To some extent, the poor themselves enrich the rich when they buy their products. Another way to get more money from the other people is through theft, deception, scam, etc. There may be homeless people in society. Someone will engage in prostitution so as not to be on the street, or simply not to be a beggar. Then a price tag can be put even on people who are sold into slavery. And there are many other examples of why capitalism lies precisely in the extreme that brings people suffering. Here we need to remember that each person does what he believes will make his life better, or keep his life situation at the same level, if the person feels good in it. Material and spiritual knowledge of a person influences his choices in each specific situation. This feature of life manifests itself very negatively in a society with any divisions, financial, political, etc. For example, people with a lot of money and/or power may begin to see a threat in a poor society, which also wants a better life. And, naturally, according to the aforementioned law, after acquiring new knowledge awareness, it will strive to achieve it. For the poor, very rich people can also be a threat, since rich exploit the poor for their high-income existence. There can be serious bloody conflicts if society does not know the basics of how spirituality works. I talked about this topic in my book, Simple Truths of Life, and I strongly advise you to read the free ebook Thiaoouba Prophecy, which sheds light on many of the fundamentals of life. The use of money within the country for people to get any products and services in their own country is not reasonable. Due to the duality of life, there are two extreme types of monetary system, where there are no restrictions on how much money each person can have. This will lead to a few wealthy people, multimillionaires today, and the vast majority of people will hardly have enough money to get vital products and resources. At the other extreme is the equalization of the received money for all people, when each person receives the same amount regardless of his work. This is not reasonable since, with this approach, it is rational to remove money altogether from the eternal use in your country. People will be able to receive the same amount of products, but there will be no cashiers, financiers, bankers, and other people involved in finance. There will be almost no thieves too, which will reduce the number of police officers. All those people freed from the monetary burden will be able to work in other truly useful jobs for society, which will reduce the average working day in the country for all people. Money also sometimes makes people stay in themselves and not in reality, since there is no confidence in the future. In the depths of consciousness there is a reflection of fear of being left without money and becoming homeless. Obtaining resources, knowledge, and technology also takes a lot of time and requires training. There is no need to have another artificially created resource, money, and litter your head with unnecessary information about all the complex intricacies of the work of that resource. and many people do not understand its work at all. So I was surprised to find out that people do not know the exact cause of inflation. There are only theories. Theories about the principles of work of what we ourselves have created. But money does not even stand close to the technologies thanks to which we make processors and similar equipment, for example. There we really may not know all the laws of physics, but at the same time we know enough to create useful things for ourselves. Socialism is also an unbalanced way of organizing society. Since under socialism there is a barrier in the form of money between a person and a product, all people suffer in one way or another. Because all people want to live without suffering, everyone will strive for a better life. Depending on material and spiritual knowledge, some people will try to pull society towards complete capitalism, while others, wiser, towards complete lack of money within the country. Since people who know the truth that I am trying to convey to the people of the earth in this book would not make a choice in favor of socialism in the first place, the chances are that people who choose to live under socialism will make a choice in favor of capitalism due to the lack of critical knowledge. This is what we see in the recent history of many countries on our planet. I will briefly talk about the now popular ideas of organizing of society where people are or are very close to all three extremes. Each person decides by himself how to create products for himself. All products are manufactured only by robotics. There is no barrier between a person and a product. Here are my thoughts on this way of organizing of society. In such a society, people do not work and do not feel like a single one, whole society. There is a division of people into those who are engaged in art, hobbies, and other self-developing things, and they are doing it only for themselves. And someone may be doing nothing at all. But for other people, they do nothing. There is an alienation of people from each other. To some extent, this reflects the division of people under capitalism, where everyone works for their own survival. And any strong division of people in society foretells problems. Here we can say that balance is when people do something, such as work, for other people, and at the same time they have enough time to do something for themselves, such as hobbies, education, outdoor activities, personal life, travels, etc. I am reminded here of the analogy that Saul said about atoms that connect very closely together to create a brick or any other building material. If the atoms repel each other, then disintegration would occur. It can also be noted that living at an extreme point does not always mean that absolutely all people will make mistakes and suffer. This means that the consequences of living in such an extreme system will encourage some people with little knowledge to make mistakes that will cause others to suffer. Next, I will briefly outline the basics of my vision of a balanced organization of society and talk about how, in my opinion, we can come to such a just life without any serious conflicts between different people. The purpose of our existence is spiritual development through our physical bodies, which must be maintained in healthy condition in order for them to live and function correctly. Otherwise, we will suffer. The more a person becomes spiritual, the less he makes mistakes and, accordingly, causes less suffering to the particles of the superior intelligence, himself and other living beings. For this reason, the more spiritual society, the greater the chance of lack of money within the country. People will start thinking about the well-being of others, and not just about themselves. I think that people will come to a spiritually oriented order in society when they get tired of suffering for their own mistakes. Their stubbornness will go away, and they will begin to learn from their mistakes, which they will be able to openly look at, and not try to erase their existence from their heads. What maintains our bodies in life? Healthy food, clean water and air, salvation from adverse weather conditions, which is housing. Since a person exists in order to develop spiritually, he needs to be able to be sometimes alone with himself and in silence. For example, quiet apartments, summer cottages of a certain minimum area, parks, etc., where a person can meditate, study calmly, and go about his business. To maintain our life, 3 ingredients are required: knowledge, resources, and tools, or technologies, with the help of which people can create other tools for their needs, such as houses, tractors, cars, medical supplies, food, purified water, sewage, electricity, the internet, etc. One of the main laws of the universe says that making a mistake leads to suffering. One of the most serious mistakes is limiting the free will of another person, or more precisely, imposing one's will on another, in a way which deprives the individual of the privilege of exercising his own free will. Therefore, the only self-discipline is needed. No one has the right to restrict the freedom of choice of another person if his actions do not harm other people. There is an exception if those other people consciously agree with such harmful activities in relation to them, which of course is still an error from the point of view of the universal law. One should also not forget about common sense and logic. If a person faces an imminent and rapidly approaching danger, and you can save him, then, of course, you will not make a mistake when you help him without his consent, while slightly influencing his physical body. People, being part of the superior intelligence, depending on their material and spiritual knowledge, perform those actions that they consider will benefit them in the life situation in which they are in. Knowledge is very important. The functioning of society is primarily based on accumulated knowledge. Therefore, people must have control over the affairs of their society, so that no one tries to introduce false knowledge that will lead to suffering. We call it democracy when people are in power. I believe that people as a whole society have power almost always, since the movement of the whole society occurs in accordance with what each individual person does. Here is an example. There is a ball that needs to be moved. When people have different levels of knowledge and understandings, they push the ball in the direction that they believe, based on their knowledge, will benefit them. If people push it from different sides with approximately the same force, then the ball will stay in place. If people understand that only by acting together they can move the ball, they will move it in one direction and make progress. It is people's different choices and actions that determine what the total direction the country will go to, not the written law which people can choose to follow or not to follow. In the digital world, many people can vote from home, but it is necessary that vote only those people who have an education in the field on which they vote. For example, new medical equipment, medical education, a new clean motor, engineering and or environmental education, etc. Otherwise, uneducated people with a bunch of conspiracy theories in their heads can cause suffering for the majority. General education will also allow voting on issues that do not require deep knowledge in certain areas. Thus, people will not suffer because of the voting of uneducated people, and, at the same time, the free will law will be respected, since if a person wants to take part in public affairs, he just needs to start educating himself, and then pass exams to confirm his knowledge. After that, he will be able to vote. General education includes at least the following disciplines: the language of your country, the general laws of your country, spirituality, history, physics, biology, chemistry, psychology, mathematics, algebra, geometry, sociology, social studies, natural history, natural science, the difference between capitalism and communism, private and personal property, freedom and slavery. Of course, they should know the descriptions of words and understand that in the description of communism, for example, there is nothing that is associated with murders, as some politicians are trying to impose on other people with little knowledge. Regarding the general laws of the country, with the correct and balanced way of organizing society, there will not be so many of them, and therefore it will not be difficult for people to remember them. There will no longer be a need for lawyers. Spirituality includes teachings about such things as the laws of the universe, the aura, the astral body, soul, reincarnation, the higher self, the etheric force field, essentially everything that Thiaoubans taught us in Michel Desmarquet's book Thiaoouba Prophecy. Of course, I perfectly understand that these subjects will be introduced only after people prove the existence of auras, telekinesis, etc. Ideally, this should not take long, given that scientists can already photograph auras and diagnose human health from them. There are other hints in Michel's book, as well as in Michael Minway's audio interview with Michel on how to prove the truth of his report. I think that it is worth including in the educational program the training to see auras, as well as teaching telekinesis, so that people know about their existence and not believe. I include psychology since the teachings about the work of our psyche are very important for a healthy life. As Sauer told Michel Desmarquet, it is in the area of the psyche that our current greatest problems exist. Physical education lessons will certainly remain in school too. Then I suppose that children should be taught about sex and palantius, and about what love and spiritual affinity are, before people develop sex drive. Otherwise, there is a chance that adolescents will unknowingly make mistakes, sleeping with everyone. I know this from what I saw at school, and if it were not for my speech stupor and some other psychological problems that I had in my 13 years, then there is some chance that I myself could have happily rushed to make such mistakes. Then, how can we get rid of sexually transmitted viral infections in such a society? The condom, as I hope you understand, is another barrier that prevents people from experiencing natural sensations during natural sex. There are two types of teaching subjects: natural, created by the superior intelligence, and artificial, which were created by people. Also, from a certain point of view, they were also created by the superior intelligence. Natural have been listed above, and they are permanent, provided our knowledge is accurate. Artificial objects are not permanent and can change. These include subjects such as languages, computer science and programming languages, country laws, traffic rules, and everything else that was created by humans. Regarding knowledge, we can say that they are finite, and we can show as a percentage, or just as a number from the total of all knowledge, the progress of how much a person already knows from all knowledge of a particular subject, or from knowledge in general, natural and or artificial. This will show the person what else he can learn at school, institute, and so on. The same progress can also show what a person still needs to learn in order to work in a particular institution. Duality applies to laws as well. There are laws of the universe which are immutable, provided that we did not make mistakes in our conclusions about how a particular thing works in the universe. But there are also laws that were artificially created by people. Artificial laws should not violate the laws of the universe, otherwise suffering will follow the mistake. The word rule is more appropriate than law, since people decide for themselves how to live. I would single out three groups that dictate the behavior of society. The laws of the universe. We know about them from science and from the proof of the existence of certain things. Following the laws of the universe, we will make few mistakes, and as a result, we will suffer little. Then there are rules invented by people. Traffic rules, grammatical rules in the language, rules of self-organization of society, and so on. What should exist so that there is no chaos? And then there are recommendations. For example, wearing a mask and gloves during a coronavirus would be recommendations. Naturally, people would be taught that the virus is not only real, but also dangerous. Do not expose yourself and others to possible suffering. It is worth understanding and remembering that each person suffers only for his own mistakes. Even before the restrictions on freedom of movement, I thought about taking less walks during the virus, as I understood that if I got sick, I could die and would not finish my book, which I consider quite important for people. You decide if this is so or not. And therefore I did not need restrictions and directions on how to live my life. But the aforementioned voting still takes a lot of time, as it distracts people from their responsibilities to society, such as work. Moreover, there are times such as war when a democratic voting will cause the death of the entire nation. Therefore, it is logical that you need to have one leader. It is also logical that this leader should make those decisions that will benefit the people. The leader must be honest, wise, and intelligent, and he must not be a member of any political party. Here, knowledge about spirituality will help us. People who have accumulated spiritual knowledge in their astral body during their previous lives will not do bad things towards anyone in their life, starting from childhood. Such people will be sincerely committed to striving to do their best for their nation. But how do we find such people? Salo advised Michel that people follow the example of the continent of Mu. The people who lived on that continent were the most organized on Earth in its entire history. People in each village, as well as duchies and other rural settlements and urban areas, will elect a person who will meet all of the above parameters. No one with a record of bad conduct or tendency towards fanaticism during their current life could be chosen. Such people are chosen for their honesty and purity, not for the promises they made but could not keep. Thus, I might not have been selected because of my 2 childhood episodes, when I laughed at a girl with my friend, and when I decided to roll around in the snow the guy who was younger than me. Some of my other life decisions should also serve as a block, but you would not have known about them if I had not personally and honestly told you about them. I mention this so that you understand that the choice of the leader of the village and the district should be approached very, very seriously. And there is no need to be afraid of anyone or anything if you know that someone had done something wrong during their life. Otherwise, there is a chance that, because of your silence, the whole country will suffer, and you too will have to suffer for your mistake. Also, a person cannot appoint himself as a candidate. If someone says that he wants to be the candidate from the village or district, then this is the clear sign that the person is hungry for attention and power. Such a person cannot be chosen as a representative. If it is so happens that there is no person who meets all the necessary parameters in a village or district, then they do not choose anyone. Further, these selected people will be sent to the nearest city, where further elections will be held. These midterm elections are held in the same way as the final ones, which I will discuss in the next paragraph. All elected representatives from all over the country will meet in the capital. There they will be divided in the groups of 6 people each. Each group will have their own conference room, and they will spend 10 days together, talking, eating together, and the like. Eventually, they will choose the leader of the group. For example, if 60 representatives came to the capital and they were divided into 10 groups, then there would be 10 group leaders. Of those 10, 7 would be chosen in the same way, and then they would choose the supreme leader. We can initially determine the number of representatives who will come to the capital for the final elections by dividing the country into virtual zones. For example, in order for 60 selected representatives to come to the capital, we need to virtually divide the country into 60 zones. Then we divide each of those zones into further zones. And this process goes on until we have several dozen villages and city districts in one mini-zone. What about cities where population density is currently very high? In my apartment building, for example, there are about 500 apartments, and about 1,000 people living in the house, which happens to be the approximate number for the village's population. In other houses there are fewer people. It might be possible to combine several houses into one zone for the election of a representative if the total number of residents does not exceed 1,000 people. Otherwise, a representative is chosen in a single apartment building. Thus, the chances are that the 7 leaders will most likely not know each other, and they will not be in cahoots. It is worth noting that in Mu, a leader was only elected in this way if the previous supreme leader died without appointing a successor, or the successor was not unanimously approved by the Council of 7. I would leave it to the people to decide by voting if they want the supreme leader to be able to appoint a successor or not. If the supreme leader shows the slight tendency to dictatorship, then the peer council of 6 must overthrow him. If for some reason this does not happen, then people initiate a voting to overthrow the entire council of 7 and then initiate new elections using the move method. The supreme leader's vote is worth 2 votes. If 4 are against him and 2 are with him on a specific issue, then they will be at a deadlock. They will spend hours or days debating until 1 in 7 changes their mind. This discussion is held in the context of intelligence, love, and concern for the people. These people do not receive any material benefits for leading the country. This is their vocation, and they do it out of love to serve their nation. This way, we avoid the problem of hiding opportunities among the leaders. Since the supreme leader is a spiritual person who really helps people and works for them, there is no fear that he will rule the country together with his 6 assistants for the rest of his life. There is no need to replace the leaders every few years, as is now the case in many countries on Earth. 6 assistants, whom the leader did not know before the election, and who are also spiritual people, will overturn him in the event of the slightest sign of dictatorship from the supreme leader. And if it suddenly turns out that the majority or all 7 will take the path of dictatorship, but the chances of this are very low, since they are all spiritual people, then people will be able to initiate a vote, referendum, on a complete change of government, and they will choose a new one. At the same time, having worked out their mistakes, namely in the fact that you need to responsibly choose a person at the first stage of the election, as well as at all other stages. In the event of the death of one of the 7 people on the council, the process of choosing a replacement will occur again. Since all the rules or laws will already exist after people vote for them, the responsibilities of the Council of 7 will include such things as introduction of new technologies that should improve people's lives and in no way harm them, then construction of roads, educational institutions, and stuff like that. All leadership meetings are broadcast online. Hidden but still recorded only those meetings that are of a secret nature, since unfriendly people can use that knowledge and information to harm the country and society in any way possible. But since people have power, they can declassify the recorded meetings by voting, in which the vast majority of people vote for declassification. I would say at least 81% of all voters, provided that at least 81% of all people who can vote have voted. If people want to change something that they believe is harmful to the entire society, or they want to add something that, in their opinion, should improve the lives of all people, then they can submit a proposal to the local vote. If a certain percentage of people from nearby settlements approve this proposal, then it will go on to the nationwide voting. I believe that local voting is necessary in order to shield most people from poorly thought out ideas. Additionally, only people with relevant education will be able to create proposals. The same applies to voters, as I said earlier. Accordingly, in such a society with proper self-organization, there will be no need for rallies or protests. Here we can draw an analogy with your house and the workers you hired to remodel the interior. This is your house and you can do whatever you want to do with it, provided that it does not harm others. You do not go to a rally or protest when you want to make changes to the work being done, do you? But you consult with the family who also live in that house until you reach a common solution. If the workers refuse to do the work, then you simply fire them and look for other foremen. And if the workers suddenly declare to you that this is now their house and they do not want to leave it, you simply call the police and then look for adequate people for your repair. People make decisions that they think will either preserve the happiness they already have or will do more good by eliminating suffering. We have these decisions depending on what life situation we are in the material world, and on what material and spiritual knowledge we have in relation to this particular life situation. Obviously, we still do not know a lot about life, and therefore there is a chance that we will find and learn something that will help us make our lives even better and fairer. This means that the model of organization of society proposed by me can be changed by a society with the accumulation of new understandings. For this reason, the model I proposed cannot have a name, but only has a description. Spiritually oriented organization of society based on the knowledge about the universe and on the known laws of the universe. You've just read a detailed description based on my current knowledge in this manifesto. I have an idea that it is better to try not to use names, but to use only descriptions when the conversation is about things that are important to society. This will eliminate misunderstandings, since people may have their own not very accurate understanding of the word, as they never went to look at the description of the word in vocabulary, especially if they heard it during their childhood and are already accustomed to their false understandings. For example, in my childhood, I often heard the word «скоммуниздить». The communism is the root of the word and it means steal, take something by force from someone. From friends, and until a certain time I had small but nevertheless negative associations in my subconsciousness about communism. Also, the description of communism not only has nothing bad in it, it strongly resembles the organization of society that I propose. In fact, I add only how to choose the right leader in the country, taking into account the still little known knowledge about spirituality and reincarnation, and that it is worth keeping a balance in all three relationships of a person with resources, products. This is all that is required for a normal spiritual life, where people live in complete freedom, which at the same time does not go beyond logic and common sense. If you are not satisfied with some individual details, then there is nothing to worry about, since if this document is circulated enough among the people, and then they initiate a public open voting for a new form of the spiritual organization of society, you will be able to subsequently put forward your ideas for consideration and subsequent voting in case there are enough people who agree with you. In general, there will be no laws we are used to. There are only the laws of the universe, which dictate what is right and what is wrong. Many of the laws of the universe are already well known to science and people with common sense. With the acquisition of new knowledge, people will adapt to new realities, which will bring more and more benefits to human society. But there will be rules for artificially created things, for example, traffic rules or rules for using different tools. Everything is free in the country, which has a positive effect on the psyche of people who are not afraid to lose their jobs and become left on the street because of this. People give back to society for the years of their education and life by the fact that they work and accordingly want to keep social life in motion. The grains will not sow themselves and then collect in bread and go to the mouths of people. We need to do something to maintain our free, healthy and spiritual way of life. Also, there are no contracts, no agreements, since nothing can go against the will of a person. People can and should restrict a person's will only when that person either commits a serious crime or his actions heavily infringe upon the free will of other people. As I mentioned earlier, minor offenses are first punished with a warning, and only after that, if a person is stubborn and does not want to learn, his next minor offenses are punished with a restraint of freedom for a short time, which will increase with subsequent similar violations. As you probably know, there are people who practice different behaviors and activities that are contrary to nature. Examples of these are homosexuality, anal sex, orgies, gender reassignment, etc. These are all mistakes, but if people want to do this, then this is their right, provided that they do not deceive anyone and do not force anyone to do anything. Naturally, they will not be able to talk about such things in front of children, who may decide to try to engage in erroneous activities, since they do not yet have the necessary knowledge to understand what is a mistake and what is not. It is worth saying that I had a little argument with a guy who defended the homosexuality of modern people, and as his evidence, he used animals that have sex with members of the same gender. It should be remembered here that all creatures, animals and people, have free will, and therefore the fact that someone can freely choose to use the tool, body, and or its various components in this case, given to them by the superior intelligence for other purposes, not as intended by the spirit, is only a manifestation of the privilege to exercise one's free will. As it was said earlier about people, all those sensations that the spirit does not want to receive are filtered out by the higher selves, and the actions that caused those sensations that the spirit does not need are errors. How does one know the true purpose of the instrument? Logic and common sense will help here. Would you try to use a screwdriver to hammer in nails? Yes, sooner or later you could hammer in a nail with a screwdriver, but you would have a bunch of abrasions and wounds, and all the effort simply would not be worth it. It is more logical to use the right tool for every existing thing and not know suffering. To some extent, we can say that each instrument has its own pair, like creatures. I think that it is worth giving access to such sources of harmful information only to those who have a general education. Otherwise, there will be problems, since people perform actions based on their knowledge, and if there is no correct knowledge in the person's soul, then false data will lead the person to an error. People should be able to understand where the mistake of those people and their ideas lies. Some may say that this goes against the free will and choice of a person, but I do not think so, because people just need to take a training course, educate themselves, and after it, they will be able to watch, read, listen, etc., whatever they want to. They will have a very simple opportunity to gain access to harmful knowledge. For example, currently people in my country graduate from 11th grade at the age of 17. And official access to adult material begins at the age of 18. I must say right away that in the event of a mistake in their knowledge and conclusions, people should have a way to eliminate that mistake in the easiest way. Science also needs a balance, a golden mean, when people study all the theories put forward and do not dismiss the possibility of the existence of certain things. People understand that they do not know everything, and they understand that there is a possibility that in the past people may have made a mistake in scientific conclusions about one thing or another. I believe that there should be a special organization that will consider and research new theories about the work of the universe and life. Thanks to it, people do not have to fight against the law of skepticism in order to reach people's minds. The Council of Seven can play a key role here too. Therefore, if members of minorities do not agree with some of my conclusions regarding some of the details, they can appeal them. Of course, society still has the final say, since it has the power almost always. I propose that each person can only own two properties, but this does not mean that a person should strive to own two properties. People will be able to leave their property as a legacy to others if they want to. and if the owner dies, then only his relatives will be able to carry out operations with the property for some time, for example 1 year. Or they can give up the property so that other people, if they wish, can register it in their own name and live in it. Registration itself can take place in a couple of minutes, if not seconds, using the internet. And the data can be written directly to a memory card in the passport, where information about a person's education and health can also be stored, so that there is no heap of different documents. Of course, copies of all data will be stored in the standard archives of the relevant organizations. Also, in the passport there may be a GPS or GLONASS chip, which a person can turn on with a mechanical key to send an SOS signal to the rescue service. For example, if a person gets lost on a hike in the mountains. Now, it is not so important where the chip will take energy for its short work. I am just giving an example of how modern technology can be used with benefits. It must be remembered that usually people create families. Therefore, it turns out that 2 people can in theory have 4 properties, which is more than enough. Of course, people should remember that they should not have more than they need. Otherwise, they will make mistakes, followed by suffering. But I can understand that many will keep land plots where their relatives used to live for their children. This is done only because in the countries like Russia, people are used to living in cities in winter, and they live for their villages and dachas in the summer. Therefore, many already own at least 2 properties. Of course, with the development of technology, people living in Russia will be able to live during cold winters in villages that will be significantly different from the villages we are used to today, with their sandy roads, often dotted with holes and other irregularities, and with no shops. With an adequate approach, we will be able to lay normal roads, build houses for everyone who needs it, build a building in each settlement where food and other things necessary for a person's daily life will be supplied as needed. For more specialized things and tools such as electric saws, computers, etc., one will have to travel to the nearest big city. Accordingly, people will have their own personal cars, and public transport will also remain. Non-working people, who have never worked and do not really want to help society for feeding it, will not be able to receive multi-room apartments, cars, land plots, or change housing. But they will be able to freely take vital products, things, and tools in the corresponding buildings where these things are available. Currently we call them stores. From everything else they will be restricted. For example, it will be possible for each person to have a card where it will be recorded whether he works or not. If he works, then using the card he will be able to open a shelf, freezer, display case, etc. with the product he needs. If not, the lock will not open. A person will just need to start working in such a job, the activity of which is vital for society, for people. Such measures are necessary, since with a large number of people who do not help society in its functioning in any way, but at the same time want to live in a multi-room apartment or drive a car, society will experience the consequences of a mistake. There is a difference between building a house and preparing food, isn't there? Which one requires more time, resources, and energy to be spent on? It is worth trying to persuade such people to work by educating them. But you also need to remember about the laws of the universe about human free will. The pressure and negativity towards them will not bring anything good to anyone. Even so, the unemployed eat and live in one-room apartment, but this is better than if they try to steal, be it outright theft or deception for the purpose of material gain, and cases are not rare when bandits even kill other people for their own temporary material enrichment. Besides swindlers, there will be no prostitution. We can say that people exchange crimes in their society for the feeding of several parasites, and this is a reasonable choice. But I do not think that we will have many people unwilling to work and help society. I think psychology will play a role in getting the unemployed to go to work somewhere to help others, thanks to whom they have food and everything else. In addition, the opposite sex is unlikely to want to create a family with such a person. Another reason to help other people, each of whom does the same. As they say, one for all for one. Probably it is worth saying here about myself. You know from my book Simple Truths of Life that I had years when I worked and when I did not. For the last 2 years I have been living from the rent of my apartment, which gave me the opportunity to officially translate Thiaoouba Prophecy book into Russian, and now I am writing my own. Both books are free and can help people. Then I also share my knowledge in videos, which also takes a lot of time to create. This activity is also important for people and can help them, even if not everyone can see it immediately due to the lack of certain material and spiritual knowledge. To some extent, I compensate with my activity for the fact that I have not been working for several years. After all, knowledge is also a vital resource for people. Accordingly, people need to give back to society, and not try to make their lives better than other people's lives. Since everyone is doing the same, giving back to society with their work, then a person will have everything he needs, and no one will threaten his wealth, since everyone will have about the same amount of things. Different people have different tastes and interests, of course. The more knowledge and technology people have, the less people need to work to create the required amount of products. But we must also remember that technology should contribute to spiritual development, and not confine people more and more within the materialistic world. Further, the decrease in the total working day is also influenced by how many people work. Thus, the number of working hours per week depends on how much products are needed to maintain the normal functioning of society, on the technologies by which these products are produced, and on how many people work. For spiritual and intellectual development, people need to have free time so that they can engage in activities that interest them, walk in nature, and just spend time in the company of other people. At the same time, people should do something so that laziness and the idea that someone will do the work for them does not develop. For this reason, people should not automate production completely, since this is an extreme that will lead to the fact that over time people will stop self-educating and become lazy, waiting for the machine to feed them and provide them with all the necessary things. Let it be a couple of hours a week, but people need to work. I think it is worth touching on the famous topic of public toilets in the absence of money in society. Since public property belongs to all people in the country, I do not think that people will litter and sully at their home, so to speak. Then people will be taught about the real purpose of the universe and about the fact that mistakes will have to be paid with suffering according to the law of the universe. If people know about these realities of life, then they will additionally not want to spoil those thanks to whom they, in part, have complete freedom and everything necessary for a healthy life. Otherwise, they will harm not only others but also themselves. Then, high technologies and automation come into force. Nobody will have to dig in the sewers with their hands if we make the appropriate tools. It is not difficult at all. It is the same with cleaning. There are already robotic vacuum cleaners. I see absolutely no problem with robots washing the floor and cleaning public toilets at night. Of course, the less people pollute, the better. It is the same case with the streets. People will litter less, as they will understand that they are doing worse to themselves and not to the janitor. Moreover, regular cleanups could be arranged so that people do not forget that their decisions and actions affect their environment. That is, when people get together and clean their own street, for example. And so, the less they litter, the less cleaning they will have to do. Of course, nothing prevents the use of high technologies here to simplify the work. I would like to note that, as it seems to me, now people litter and spoil urban things because of the created division in society into different classes and layers. In the spiritual organization of society, people will feel much more united than under capitalism, where everyone is for himself, one for all for one, as they say. More people will help others and not reject them. Even now, some people pick up other people's garbage and throw it into the trash can. So, once while I was walking near Semyonovskaya, I saw a young woman who was walking in front of me, and she suddenly went to the lawn, picked up the garbage that was lying there, and then threw it into the nearest trash can. Therefore, there is no problem of toilets and garbage in the spiritually oriented organization of society, in which there is no money and politicians. It may exist at the initial stage, when some people do not yet have certain knowledge and understandings, which I spoke about earlier. But over time there will be less and less of them, if society tries to teach them about culture. The army is naturally needed. If a society does not defend itself, then it increases the chances of becoming conquered. The size of the territory occupied by society on the planet, as well as the natural and geological parameters of this territory, also directly affect those chances. The spirituality and freedom of a society also play a role if it is surrounded by capitalistic countries where the laws and truths of the universe are little known, or people do not believe in them. A completely free society that does not use money would be a very good example for those people who still choose to use money to get everything they need to sustain their lives within their country, if the price is not too high for them. Healthy people go to the army by choice. Gender does not matter, but women should think carefully if they want to push themselves too hard. Naturally, pregnant women cannot serve. Also, people will be able to stop their military training at any time. Self-defense is one of the most serious things, and it should never be underestimated. Depending on the technological progress of a country and the external geopolitical situation, people need to have a constant percentage of military personnel. If there is a decline in people who want to study military science, then it is the task of the 7 leaders and news services to notify the public about this shortage and explain why it is dangerous for the entire nation. The goal is to encourage people to make the decision to undergo military training that should not last more than a year. Naturally, there will be people who will devote their entire lives to military service. Such people should exist, since there are things that require deep knowledge and great experience. Also, there should always be a military buffer to repel a surprise attack from a potential aggressor. We also need to talk about the exchange of products with other societies or other countries. If there were only 2 societies on the planet and they did not want to unite with each other in one country, then they could exchange products with each other directly, which is barter exchange. For example, a certain number of cars for a certain number of apples. Such an exchange can only take place if one of the countries cannot produce on its territory what the other one produces. It is worth saying that the climate can also play a role in the exchange of products. So, for example, a country that is located in the south and has access to the sea may enable people from the northern cold country to enter it for swimming and sunbathing, as well as general travel. Then the northern country will give the southern one a predetermined amount of products for each tourist. Only in very rare cases will people have on their territory everything that they can possibly need. People will not have anything that could interest another country. In these rare cases, trade will not be possible. But those countries will be able to unite if the people of both vote in favor. But what happens when we have more than 2 countries? It must be said that direct product exchange is still more than possible, but only if each country has something that it can offer to give to another country in exchange for the products it receives from them. If one of the societies cannot give anything to the other, then the money comes to the rescue, and this is the only case when they are really necessary and useful. Before going any further, let me remind you that the tools themselves cannot be evil. The way we choose to use tools can bring pain and suffering if we misuse that tool. Now you need to understand what money is. This truth is also very simple, but it may not be so obvious given that money is an integral part of our society. I realized it only when I became interested in Bitcoin. Imagine that there are 3 nations on the planet, each of which, for their own reasons, doesn't want to unite with the other into one society. Society A produces a surplus of what B needs. B has what C needs. C grows a lot of products that A needs. In this example, the exchange of goods occurs at different times of the year, and all societies have computer technologies. What happens when A gives goods to B? They make a corresponding entry in the general catalog that A gave B a certain amount of products and did not receive anything material in return for it. The catalog belongs to all 3 countries, and each side has its own observers, who are present at the transfer of goods and make sure that the entry in the catalog is accurate. Even before creating the catalog, people determined for themselves how much of a product would correspond to another product. For this purpose, they could take either the smallest available product or come up with a physically non-existent product that would be equal to 1, and then they would count how many such units are in other products. If, with the development of technology, something appears that contains only a part of a 1, then a fractional number less than 1 is simply used. Thanks to this, we can easily calculate from the catalog which country has received less production. Suppose that A has 10,000 not received units, NRU, after shipping its products to country B. Please note that since the number means non-received products, no one will try to specifically accumulate as many such units as possible, because this means that the country gave a bunch of real goods to others, but received literally nothing in return. And now A receives products from C. As before, a record is made in the catalog about how many products C gave and to whom, that is A, which did not give anything in return. Depending on the quantity of the delivered goods, the following occurs. First, if the product is cost 10,000 units, then A now has 0 NRU, and C now has 10,000, since up to this moment it had 0 in this example. If the goods are equal to 6,000 units, then A has 4,000 NRU, and C has 6,000. If the goods are equal to 13,500 units, then A has 0 NRU, and C has 13,500. A does not have minus 3,500 units, since it has completely caused its shortage in received products. 0 is the minimum value, as we only care if a country has a certain amount of not received products or not. C can then get a lot of things for its 13,500 without the need to give anything in return. If the goods are equal to 6,000 units, and A simultaneously provides C with products equal to 3,000 units, then A has 7,000 not received units. That is 10,000 minus 6,000 plus 3,000. And C has 3,000. That is 6,000 minus 3,000. And so, we understand that money is just an entry in the catalog about how much products the society has not received in the process of product exchange with other countries. For this reason, there is no reason for society to accumulate a large amount of unreceived products in the form of a large sum of money. As you understand, this money does not have inflation, and the products themselves cannot decrease in price. A chicken will remain a chicken, and a cow will remain a cow in 300 years. Yes, the new technologies will vary how much for the delivery of such products the country will receive NRU. For example, such products may be phones, cars, etc. This is logical since, for example, we have more equipment in new cars than in models from the 80s. The price of a product can be determined by the calorie content and usefulness of 1 kilogram of it. Other parameters also affect the price. Moreover, the price will be fixed only when all countries agree with it. Nobody can just say that a product is worth 1,000,000 units because they like that number. I will leave it to scientists to decide the price of each individual product. In reality, we will be able to safely use such currencies as dollars and euros with many countries. And if 3 or more countries want to create the aforementioned catalog and trade through it, then why not? This catalog will not in the least prevent countries from trading with others for already existing money, will it? Modern money works on the same principle, but there is a catch in that it does not belong to the whole society, but to individuals. The process of creating modern money is also different, and few people understand how it works. But at the same time, everyone uses money, and many do not bother to wonder about this process. You can often hear about broadening one's horizons, but I wonder if people should also learn to expand their focus. If we take photography for the analogy. When you are given a salary, you receive absolutely nothing material for your work. But having money on your hands allows you to exchange it for something tangible, be it food, clothing, tools, and so on. Accordingly, the more money you have on hands, the poorer you are, usually. Everything is the same as in my example with countries that temporarily become poorer until another country gives them its products, lowering any review of the country that got the goods. Your wealth is potential, not actual. You will become actually richer only when you buy something with this money. But here too, there is a capitalistic trick. Not everything that is sold under capitalism is of real benefit to you, and some things could harm you or even kill you. Then there is a possibility that money can simply depreciate. That is why many people try to buy with their money movable and immovable properties. Under capitalism, there are a lot of jobs that, to put it mildly, do not improve the life of the whole society, and sometimes even make it worse, trying with various tricks to swindle money out of people so that they buy something that they do not really need. This fact leads us to the following truth. Many people see the obvious. If they got a lot of easy money in a small amount of time, they could buy a lot with it. Since, depending on material and spiritual knowledge, people do what they believe will benefit themselves in the situation in which they find themselves. Then, under capitalism, there are people who do not have much spiritual knowledge, and for this reason, they commit crimes in order to get those very easy money. Of course, they are making a mistake, for which sooner or later they will pay. But society also suffers for its decision to use money within the country to obtain food and goods. Vital food, things, and simple housing should be free for everyone, without exception. This is the only way crime in the country will decline, which in turn will reduce the number of police officers. This brings us to the next truth. All those people who are now engaged in essentially parasitic activities, as well as those who are called upon to eliminate the crime, will no longer have the need to engage in their activities if everything necessary for healthy life becomes free of charge, even for the temporarily unemployed and those who generally do not want to do anything. Society will benefit from this, since the chances of being cheated for money will suddenly plummet. And if society knows about everything that I wrote about in my main book, Simple Truths of Life, then the chances that people will be cheated for other reasons, such as for sex, will fall even further. Further, society will benefit from the fact that many of those people who now do not participate in the production of useful products, but consume them, will go to work at useful for society jobs, which will reduce the average working day for all people in the country. It can also be noted that it will not be necessary to have a huge amount of educational websites, for example such which teach foreign languages, history, physics, etc., since there is only one truth. We will only need one website, which will be completely controlled by the society, and where scientists and researchers with the proper education and experience will write. As for the theories, it will be possible to create a separate section or a forum just for them. Naturally, people will be able to run their own websites and blogs, just like they do now. All of this should reduce the amount of informational noise that is created by the desire of people to find a way to make money. All those people will also be able to go to work and help reduce the total working hours. It has to do with the saying work hard. Many things already have their own monopolists. For example, photo editors, 3D programs, music applications, etc. Work hard or not, it is hard to do something useful and necessary, improve those programs, and at the same time come out ahead of them. And the first place will be taken only if people stop using the competitors' products and start using yours. Here again we could have one program for the whole planet that would be improved more and more collectively by all people who can offer something new and useful. Of course, such a program could consist of different modules, pieces, so that people do not have to download a bunch of gigabytes of data just to correct the color balance of a photograph, for example. Thus, we can see the reason why the presence of money within society is a huge mistake. They encourage the division of people within society, when everyone is for himself, and sometimes for his loved ones and relatives. Further, people are divided into so-called classes, and with politics, people are divided even further. Then people are divided by religions. Next, the first division of people is influenced by a variety of news agencies, which often contradict each other in their reports. Yet, there is only one truth. All these divisions lead to the fact that people drag the country in different directions, since people have different views on what they think will benefit them. This is very dangerous for society as a whole, since all these groups of people within such a society want to protect themselves and their interests. Injustice and conflicts with such a wrong system of organization of society are guaranteed, which we see in all countries where there is money. Politicians, religions, and journalists, for whom the oath to tell the truth and only the truth and nothing but the truth is just a ritual. Society often becomes the enemy of many corrupt governments, since people, being the real bearers of power, are able to punish corrupt officials if they can unite. One of the reasons why divide and conquer tactics exist and can be heard of a lot in modern times. There is also a finite amount of money. This is important to understand when you hear someone say that if you worked harder, you would have as much money as millionaires. If everyone had the same amount of money, then we would live under socialism. In fact, businesses are looking for ways to suck money out of people so that they voluntarily give it to the business, which leads to the impoverishment of the majority of the population and the enrichment of the few, as long as people agree that money has value. I will not dwell on the negative consequences of capitalism in detail, since there is a lot of information about this on the internet. For example, you can watch video clips of this for YouTube channels, which I give links to at the end of the book. The original purpose of my book was to talk about what most people currently know little about. It is worth briefly touching on the topic of competition, which you can hear so often right now. Competition within a society is needed only if people use money. Since a corporation belongs only to a narrow circle of people, and since all people do what will benefit them, the chances are that not very spiritual leadership will want to raise the price of their products in order to rake even more money from people for themselves. The monopolist company will set high prices and will not develop products too much further, which will damage a large part of society. In my proposed system without money, all people own production and will do what will bring benefit to them, for the whole society and not just for one rich person. Also, society is motivated by the development of technology, the advancement of science, since this will improve the life of all people with a reasonable approach to how technology is used, without going to extremes. In a moneyless society, it is better to have one enterprise employing 100 people who share knowledge, discoveries, and ideas with each other, than to have two competing enterprises employing 50 people in each. And those people are prohibited from sharing new knowledge, discoveries, and ideas with the competing business. The first is clearly more effective than the second, since if one person in such a team has a bright but incomplete idea, then another person may have a missing element in his knowledge bank to complete the idea and then solve the main common task, the result of which is important to all people in the society. In the second case, those two people could be in two different competing enterprises, and they would never almost instantly solve the problem posed. It could take a lot of time and require a lot of effort and resources before the main task would be solved. It is worth saying that things like restaurants, hairdressers, and other small businesses will remain. One difference will be that they will be managed by people living within a certain radius from a particular building. Locals will be able to vote on changes to the restaurant, since the restaurant exists for them and not vice versa. Of course, even before creating a local vote, you will need to find out about the availability of certain things or products that you want to supply to the restaurant. And you will also need to make sure that other people will not be harmed. This is not so difficult to do when using computer technology to track the balanced distribution of resources and products in a society. The same applies to small-scale production of niche products that most people may not need. After the approval of the project in an open voting, the organizers will be given factory premises, and they will be able to order the production and supply of the necessary resources and tools. Naturally, in the event of a shortage of resources or tools, priority will be given to socially important factories and plants. So, all movable and immovable property, which is not housing, for example apartments, country houses, etc., and which is of great importance for the whole society, becomes public property. That is, big shops, fields, farms, factories, plants, mines, etc. go to society, while cafes, restaurants, small workshops, and so on remain with the previous owners. Those owners will not be able to take any action with this property, except to make it a public property, that is, belonging to all people. Naturally, when the owner dies, his property automatically passes to society, apart from housing, about which I talked above. These balanced measures should help to reduce the tension in order to give people a chance to come to freedom and justice of the new spiritually oriented organization of society. It is worth clarifying that people living in villages, townships, etc., and city districts will vote for local former private properties that are close to their place of residence, and do not play a big role for all people in the country: hairdressers, cafes, small theaters, etc. What matters to all people in the country: fields, farms, factories, resorts, historic buildings, theaters, museums, etc., will be governed either by the voting of all the people in the country or and by the Council of Seven. Local voting will also affect abandoned houses, which people can either demolish for example, more landscaping of the city, or renovate. In the presence of homeless people, which will exist after capitalism, the existing and habitable houses need to be renovated, of course, so that the former homeless can live in them at the initial stage of the new moneyless lifestyle. Of course, all kinds of real art will remain. Here, too, there will be changes for the better, since people will no longer create films, paintings, etc. for money. I would also like people to pay more attention to the architectural side of their buildings and houses. Now many buildings are simple reinforced concrete boxes, which does not have a very good effect on our psyche. It is also worth remembering about the balance between artificial structures and nature between them. Massive displacement of nature, even if very beautifully designed buildings are involved, will not do much good for human spiritual development and mental health. As for the secrets of science and military affairs, the disclosure of which can ruin the country, I would advise people to vote at what percentage of those who voted yes, as well as at what turnout. Society will be able to declassify the classified documents for themselves, and of course for the whole world. For example, 81% with 81% turnout for people over 18 years old who are capable of making important decisions, have proper education. In fact, it is worth turning to science and knowledge to determine these numbers more precisely. Also, people should not forget that resources are not unlimited, which means that overpopulation can become a real problem. It is the task of each country to calculate how many people they are able to feed on their territory. This number will be a limit for the population, meaning that if the population is close to this figure, then there is a recommendation for women not to have more than 2 children, which should keep the population at the same level. And if the population will exceed the calculated limit, then there is a recommendation for women to have only 1 child. This number will be a limit for the population, meaning that if the population is close to this figure, then there is a recommendation for women not to have more than 2 children, which should keep the population at the same level. And if the population will exceed the calculated limit, then there is a recommendation for women to have only 1 child. This recommendation will be cancelled when the amount of people naturally falls to a stable number. Here I would recommend to read about the symptothermal fertility recognition method. So, how do we come to this new way of organizing society, given that we live under capitalism? It must be remembered that people do what they believe will benefit them or not make their life worse. These decisions are influenced by what material situation people are in, and what spiritual and material knowledge they have about this situation. Knowledge is power, as I say. It follows from this that, of course, you first need to prove the reality of at least some of the things that are said in Michel Desmarquet's book Thiaoouba Prophecy. Almost everyone can do this if they try to follow my example. I described in my book Simple Truths of Life how I was able to learn to see auras while concentrating on my pineal gland, partially separated my astral body from my physical one, astral projection, learned telekinesis, and had some experience with my higher self. You can learn to do all of this too. This is not a gift, but knowledge. Also, do not forget about the abilities of the higher self of the first category, which is curing illnesses and resuscitating the dead. But at the same time, information should be disseminated about the book by Michel Desmarquet and, if you wish, about my book which you're reading now. Here it is necessary to understand that many people will not go looking for life without money and spirituality on their own, since they have no reason for this. They do not have the necessary knowledge to try to find the information about these things. And the life situation that they are currently in is not encouraging them to go and search for this information. Remember that knowledge is the root cause of all decisions and actions taken, and therefore it is important that people who read this book spread knowledge themselves to all their friends, loved ones, and relatives, regardless of their views and beliefs. If you want, you can use social networks to educate others, but it is best to just talk to everyone you know. Tell them what you read about in these free ebooks. Tell them about spirituality and the proposed model for organizing society in this manifesto. Let them read these books themselves, which will cost them nothing but time. But during this time, they will be able to learn a lot of new and interesting things if we talk about Thiaoouba Prophecy. You decide for yourself what you want to think about my own book. In turn, some of those people who see the truth will themselves spread knowledge among their friends and relatives, and so on along the chain until almost everyone knows. Suppose it happens. What is next? First, we need to talk about some of the details of the transition to a moneyless and politicians-free form of organization of society. People will defend what they have. This must be remembered if society wants the most painless transition to freedom and absence of money. For this reason, and as I have already mentioned, repetition is the mother of learning, as I say. Each person will continue to have absolutely everything material that he had under capitalism. Apartments, dachas, cars, money, everything. This is his property which he earned in a society whose people agreed by their actions that people can have almost everything if they have money. The only exception is the property which weighs way too large overall for the whole society to allow it to remain in the possession of one person, or in the possession of a small group of people. Additionally, absolutely all loans and other financial debts will be cancelled, since they exist due to the fact that society wants them to be a part of their life. People always have power, and if the majority of people in society suddenly decide that they no longer want to have money within their territory on the planet, then they will not have money by definition. Remember the analogy with your house and workers. And just as a side note, it is impossible to pay off the loan when everything is free and there is no salary. Your personal money will naturally remain in your bank account, as it is your personal property. You just no longer have to use it to get various products and services within your country. Here, too, all banks will be able to merge into one bank completely controlled by the society, for simplicity. The printing of money in your country will stop accordingly. And yes, your country's exchange rate is likely to change, namely, it can go down, up, or remain in the same place in relation to other currencies. Because of the huge number of variables, it is difficult to say exactly what will happen. All property will also remain with its owners, regardless of how many real estate each person can have after the nationwide open voting. But they will be able to gift it to someone, for example, children, before the voting and after that, if the donee does not have a limit of available real estate, and the real estate itself does not exceed the property limits chosen by the people. If the bourgeoisie will have knowledge from Thiaoouba, then with this approach, many representatives of the bourgeoisie will not oppose changes, since they will not be oppressed concerning their personal property. By the way, I hope I do not need to talk about why limits on real estate are even needed when everything is absolutely free. In fact, it would be nice to have limits on personal vehicles just in case. If the real estate exceeds the selected limits, for example, huge plots with huge mansions, then local residents will be able to decide for themselves what to do with them after the death of the owners. That is, to make an apartment building, demolish and divide the site into established areas, or save and use the building for something else. For example, for a museum. There is no reason to go into all the details right now. I just want to make it clear that with complete democracy and unity, people can get justice. Time, periods, moves in the same way for all people. And therefore, it is not fair that different people sometimes receive 1,000 times more money and, accordingly, material things than other people, who often do much more important work. Then people should not focus too much on various conspiracy theories and rumors. Of course, it is very bad that some high-ranking people do very bad things, but the fact is that there is very little society can do about it directly, since it requires proof, evidence, witnesses, etc. Naturally, criminals will not just sit and look at how others are trying to get them imprisoned. This brings us to 2 points. Firstly, in my opinion, people should spend their time on self-education and on educating of their loved ones and acquaintances about all those things that they could learn from Michel Desmarquet's book and from mine. The faster we self-educate as a whole society, the faster we can stop suffering for our own mistakes. Secondly, people will have to give amnesty to all thieves and corrupt officials, no matter who they are and what position they held. This must be done if people want to have a chance to move to the new spiritual form of organizing society without a single death, since otherwise some of the criminals will defend themselves by eliminating the threat. Violence, as they say, breeds violence. Remember that no one can escape the law of the universe. Even Jesus had to pay for his mistakes of the past. All those people who commit a crime against their people will sooner or later be punished by the universal law for their mistakes. They will have to suffer for their own wrong choices. People should also remember that because of their own decisions and actions, including inaction, they have their own government and all the injustice they have in their countries. One of these mistakes lies in the use of money, and the other lies in the completely wrong way of electing leaders. Of course, we are not talking about forgiving serious crimes, such as murder, rape, child molestation, etc. But it will be possible to significantly mitigate their punishment if those individuals decide to cooperate rather than interfere with people. Policemen and other units with weapons will also benefit more from a manless society than from money. In addition to the fact that they, like everyone else, will be able to receive many products for free, they will not need to deal with a large number of criminals, which will increase their chances of a quiet life, and soon many will be able to go to work elsewhere. And if need be, they can get a free education. Therefore, it is important that people calmly and absolutely unobtrusively educate people in law enforcement agencies about how the new way of organizing society will work. They should also know about real spirituality and the purpose of the universe. Well, and that the law of the universe does not care if they obey orders. A mistake is a mistake, from the consequences of which no one can escape. So, most of them will be on the side of millions of ordinary people, and not on the side of a few people who are bluntly hungry for money and power. It will be impossible to buy such policemen with a large salary. A free, democratic, spiritual, moneyless, healthy, and generally balanced in all areas society is the biggest salary one can get. The policemen themselves should be hired based on their aura, which will show the degree of their spirituality. That is, you need to take more or less spiritual people who are good and kind people, and not those who just want to see themselves being stronger than others. Needless to say, the police should not have any plans for detecting violations per unit of time, so that people working in the police do not have the desire to look for violations where such do not exist. A civilized society will strive to completely eliminate crime, and, accordingly, to have minimum of police in the country. Here I can also mention the judicial system. With the modern justice system, there is a chance to convince an innocent or to release a criminal into the street. I would advise you to pay attention to the judicial system of the Bakratinians, from the book Thiaoouba Prophecy, who used 6 specially trained telepaths to read the thoughts of a suspect who, sooner or later, simply could not help but start thinking of something. The first session lasted 6 hours, and from time to time unexpected sounds were used to disturb the suspect's concentration. The same procedure was used for all witnesses, but in a different building. No one exchanged a word. In the next 2 days, the procedure was carried out again, but this time it lasted 8 hours. Then, all the mind readers submitted their notes to the 3 judges, who interviewed and cross-examined the suspect and witnesses. On my own behalf, I will say that perhaps reading auras could also help to reveal the liar, but only if the person agrees to answer the questions. Some criminals will probably remain silent, so as not to betray the truth. When people disseminate knowledge and understand that the majority greenlights the proposed idea, then they will be able to initiate a public open voting for the new form of spiritual organization of society. Voting should be open, as this will not allow anyone to change someone else's vote. After the formal confirmation of the people's choice on paper, people will need to vote for different individual details of the functioning of society. For example, how many real estate one person can have, and other details related to apartments and summer cottages. For example, maximum height of country houses, minimum indentation of walls of a country house from the edge of the neighboring plot, maximum footage of apartment, etc. The degree of punishment for serious crimes, such as murder, rape, and so on. Naturally, people do not vote yes or no at once for all the items, but vote for each item separately. If people vote responsibly, then very rarely they will have to vote for amendments. Ideally, never. After that, people will need to really live according to the new rules that they themselves have chosen for themselves. Remember that people have power, as each person's decision plays a role in where the whole society moves. Written words on paper do not mean anything if people's actions are completely different. There have been cases in history when the overwhelming majority of people voted for one thing, but a handful of politicians decided differently, and the overwhelming majority followed the minority. There are also examples when people in the so-called power acted against the laws, but many people did not care. They were busy with their material concerns, not seeing the root cause of their suffering. This proves again that people have power, but they need to be as one unit, and not allow someone to divide them. If people try to calmly teach other people the simple truth, then more and more people will push their country in the same and the correct direction. These understandings show the incorrectness of the decisions of some people who want to move from a troubled country to a prosperous one, or which they consider to be prosperous, without having at their disposal certain knowledge. They do not understand that their own actions are being manifested in the kind of government that they have, and, accordingly, in the kind of life that we all have on this planet. And if they run away from the problems instead of solving them, then the result will be of the negative nature. What you sow, you reap. In fact, this is the law of the universe about suffering for mistakes, and about finding happiness for the right decisions. I myself, as you remember from my book, wanted to live in the USA when I was 18 years old. I was looking for a better life without having certain knowledge and without understanding then all those simple truths about which I wrote in my book. Now I understand that there is a chance that I could have been disappointed had I actually been able to go to America. In some modern countries, people living in villages and urban areas hardly know each other since childhood. I would suggest living 50 years under a full democracy regime so that people can normally distribute and settle in the country, and only then conduct their first election of 7 leaders according to the Moose election system, which I spoke about in my manifesto. Another way could lie in a temporary, for example a week, online record about whom each village and urban area wants to choose, so that old acquaintances, in case of anything bad, could report a person's bad behavior and, accordingly, his low spirituality, so that local residents are no longer able to choose him as a representative. Such old acquaintances will need to prove that they personally know the potential representative, so that there are no false, malicious reports. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope that you will try to spread the message with the people you know. Thank you.